Welcome to the Explainer. Listen, if you're tackling your GCSE Edexcel psychology exams right now, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're serving up your ultimate structured revision guide for mastering a completely massive topic, and that's Kohlberg's theory of moral development. We're going to break down his studies, the exact stages he proposed, and of course, those vital strengths and weaknesses you absolutely need to secure those top marks. Okay, ready? Let's dive right in. We're going to start exactly where Kohlberg started with his story. I want you to imagine this incredibly high-stakes scenario. It's famously known as the Heinz dilemma. So first, Heinz's wife is dying from a very specific type of cancer. The doctors say a newly discovered drug from a local chemist might actually save her. Second, the chemist is charging 10 times what the drug costs to make. It's a price Heinz literally cannot afford, even after asking his entire family for help. Third, Heinz is desperate. He begs the chemist to lower the price or maybe just let him pay later, but the chemist outright refuses, saying, he discovered it to make money. So out of options, Heinz breaks into the pharmacy later that night and steals the drug to save his wife. Now, I want to ask you directly, should Heinz have stolen the drug? Take just a second to really think about what you would do. Would you steal it? Would you just walk away? Now, what's really fascinating here is that Lawrence Kohlberg actually did not care about your yes or no answer. He wasn't judging the action itself as right or wrong. What he cared about was your reasoning. Why did you make that choice? Because for Kohlberg, that why is the absolute key to unlocking a person's level of moral development. So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We've just covered the Heinz dilemma hook. Next up is Kohlberg's methodology, followed by the stages of morality. And finally, we'll hit the strengths and weaknesses. Section 1, the methodology, or how Kohlberg actually studied morality. So Kohlberg firmly believed that morality develops over time, in very specific stages. And to prove this, well, he couldn't just test people once, right? He launched a massive longitudinal studies starting in 1968 that lasted a full 12 years. He started out with 75 young American males aged between 10 and 16. Over the years, he gave them a whole series of moral dilemmas in the form of these short stories. For instance, as the boys hit ages 13, 16, 20, and 24, he'd ask them these super intense questions, like whether a doctor should perform a mercy killing on a fatally ill woman who is in terrible pain. By the time the study ended, his subjects were between 22 and 28 years old. And to make things even more thorough, he compared these American males to boys in Canada, the UK, Mexico, Turkey, and Taiwan, just to see if geography changed things up. Then, in a later, really major follow-up study published in 1984, the focus shifted to a sample of 72 Chicago boys. Kohlberg tracked 58 of these exact same boys at 3-year intervals for a staggering 20 years. Every 3 years, these participants sat down for a grueling 2-hour interview, analyzing 10 different dilemmas, and yes, that included the Heinz dilemma. By constantly tracking the exact same group, Kohlberg could literally watch their reasoning mature and completely change as they grew up. Section 2, the theory itself, looking at the levels and stages of moral reasoning. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty, you have to remember this golden rule. Participants always progress through these stages in a fixed order. You absolutely cannot skip a stage, and you never ever regress backwards. Kohlberg basically divided this whole progression into 3 broad levels, and each of those has 2 stages. We've got pre-conventional morality, usually seen in kids under 9. Then there's conventional morality for young people and adults. And finally, post-conventional morality, which is based on your own universal values. Let's start with that first level, pre-conventional morality. So at stage 1, a child's entire sense of right and wrong is completely driven by just avoiding punishment. If you ask a kid under 9 about Heinz, they are usually going to tell you Heinz shouldn't steal the drug because he'll get caught and go to jail. It's literally that simple. Now, at stage 2, things get just a bit more transactional. Kids start valuing the benefits of an action. They're basically asking, well, what's in it for me? Morality at this stage is purely determined by physical rewards or physical punishments. Now watch how this evolves in the next level, conventional morality. This is where most adolescents and adults actually sit. Down at stage 3, people desperately want to be seen as a good member of society. They just want to be liked. So someone at this stage might say, Heinz shouldn't steal because people will think he's a thief and his wife wouldn't want to be cured by a criminal. Stage 4 takes this a step further into maintaining social order. It becomes this massive social duty to obey authority in the law. Here, the reasoning is just, Heinz shouldn't steal because stealing is a crime, period. The law is the ultimate moral compass here. And finally, we reach the absolute highest tier, post-conventional morality.
At stage 5, individuals recognize that laws are essentially just social contracts that we opt into, kind of like a democracy, and they totally acknowledge that these can differ between cultures. They believe laws exist for the greater good, sure, but sometimes they conflict with deeper moral values. And then there's stage 6. This is the ultimate pinnacle. At this stage, people are guided by universal ethical principles, things like the absolute sanctity of a human life. A stage 6 thinker believes that saving a life is universally far more important than a pharmacist's property rights, which means Heinz is actually morally obligated to steal the drug, even if the law says otherwise. Now, you might assume a lot of adults make it to that top tier. Actually, scratch that. Prepare for a bit of a shock. Kohlberg's data revealed that only 10% of people actually reach this final post-conventional level of morality. A whopping 90% of the population remains firmly stuck in the conventional level, heavily relying on societal laws and group norms to dictate what is right and wrong. But despite that low 10% statistic, Kohlberg did claim that this quote right here represents a very typical mature adult response. The man should steal the drug to cure his wife. He may have to pay a penalty, but at least he has saved a human life. Notice how this reasoning acknowledges the social contract, meaning the penalty of the law, but it ultimately prioritizes the universal ethical principle of a human life.
Section 3. Evaluating Kohlberg. Let's look at those strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, so the biggest, most glaring issue with Kohlberg's work is that his dilemmas lack ecological validity. They are incredibly artificial. I mean, just think about his sample for a second. He was interviewing 10 to 16-year-old boys. These kids have obviously never been married. They've certainly never had to decide whether to steal some wildly expensive experimental cancer drug to save a dying wife. Because the whole scenario was just so utterly alien to their actual lived experiences, critics strongly argue that their answers might not reflect true moral behavior in the real world at all.
And right here is a massive plot twist brought forward by the psychologist Carol Gilligan. She pointed out a rather catastrophic flaw. Kohlberg based his entire foundational theory on an all-male sample. His theory is completely androcentric. Gilligan argued that male morality tends to be based on abstract principles of law and justice, which, surprise, surprise, perfectly matches Kohlberg's upper stages. But female morality, she argued, is very often based on principles of compassion, care, and interpersonal relationships. By only studying boys, Kohlberg completely missed half the human population's perspective on what actually makes an action moral.
There are a couple more weaknesses you definitely need to jot down. First is cross-cultural validity. Later research found that not all societies out there demonstrate this post-conventional morality, which suggests Kohlberg's stages might just be reflecting Western democratic ideals, rather than some universal human nature. Second, his conclusions were honestly a bit inaccurate based on his own data. He claimed adults possess post-conventional morality, yet his own findings and those of critics like Gilligan showed very, very few adults actually ever reach stage 6. It kind of seems like he might have forced his data just a little bit to perfectly fit his neat 6-stage model.
But hey, it's not all bad news. The theory does have some really significant strengths, primarily in its methodology. The fact that Kohlberg conducted such extensive longitudinal tracking, literally following the exact same boys for up to 20 years, is a huge win. This meant he wasn't just comparing totally different groups of people and guessing why they were different. He actually proved that moral reasoning genuinely develops and changes within the very same individuals over time, completely ruling out random individual differences.
Furthermore, his theory was seriously backed up by later research. A researcher named Walker conducted a huge study using 233 participants. Crucially, Walker tested both sexes, totally addressing Gilligan's critique, and he tested a massive age range, from 5 all the way up to 63. And Walker's results? Almost all participants moved through the stages exactly as Kohlberg predicted. This is a real game changer because it heavily suggests that the core structure of Kohlberg's theory really is correct. Which brings us to the end of our explainer, and we're turning it right back to you. We started this whole thing by asking what you would do in the Heinz dilemma. Now that you understand the rules, the levels, and that huge focus on the why rather than the what, I want you to analyze yourself. Based on your reasoning from earlier, what stage of moral development are you actually in? Are you motivated by punishment, by society's strict laws, or by universal ethics? Really think about it. Was your answer actually about saving a human life, or were you just following the rules? Thanks so much for learning with the explainer today, and absolute best of luck with your GCSE revision.